So growing up, I had a great love for stand-up comedy and had an obsession with stand-up comedians. So much so that my dream growing up was to become a stand-up comedian myself. I went to college and actually got a chance to get up on stage and perform, and actually paid a little bit of my way through college performing stand-up. The fact that I became a rabbi tells you how good I actually was. But there was one thing that always bothered me, and that was, why is it that so many comedians are Jewish? The comedians themselves, the writers, the producers, directors, everyone. I have this thing, by the way, at the end of a movie, do you do this? Where they roll the credits. Me and my wife, we like play Spot the Jew. Do you ever do that? I'm obsessed with this whole thing. And how did I know that these people were actually Jewish? Well, it's not so easy. You've got to dig around a little bit, right? But if you look through, you'll see that these people have real Jewish names. Woody Allen wasn't born Woody Allen. He was Alan Stewart Konigsberg. Mel Brooks, Mel Kaminsky. Sid Caesar was Sid Zisser. Joan Rivers, Joan Alexandra Malinsky. Jon Stewart, yes. Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz. And, of course, Jackie Mason. Jackie Mason was Yaakov Moshe Meza. I know you're all surprised to learn that Jackie Mason was Jewish, but he actually is. And what bothered me was, well, why? Why is it that all of these comedians are actually Jewish? So I started to ask around, and the first thing I wanted to figure out was, well, what makes comedy funny? What is comedy? So I asked around a lot of my friends who work in the industry as writers and producers, and I came out with one good definition of what comedy is. And I want to share it with you. Comedy is tragedy that happens to other people. That's pretty much what it's all about. So I had a working definition, but it didn't answer the whole Jewish angle. And then one day, I was reading a beautiful commentary on the Torah. And in order for us to appreciate this, we have to go back 3,326 years to the birth of our nation, the Jewish people. And you know the Jewish people were in Egypt, and Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses came and he took us out of Egypt. You saw the movie. This is from the book. And the scene builds up very dramatically. We know that the Jewish people left, and then Pharaoh changed his mind, and he wanted to get the Jewish people back after he let his people go. And Exodus chapter 14 builds up the scene very nicely for us. And it says that the Egyptians pursued after them. All the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and the army overtook them, encamping by the sea. And when Pharaoh drew close, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they were afraid, the Jewish people. And the children of Israel cried out to God. So there we are, 7 days after leaving Egypt, standing at the Red Sea, and we are trapped. It's all over. All bets are off. Behind us are the Egyptians. In front of us was the Red Sea. To the right and left was a wilderness. Where could we go? Now, what reaction do you think the Jewish people should have? Cry, scream, fight, run? But what they did was say something really unusual. And that's this verse over here. And they said to Moses, "Were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us to die here in the wilderness?" What a strange thing to say. I mean, what is that? Is it rhetorical? What were they doing exactly? And over the years, I skipped over that verse in the Torah until I came upon this fantastic commentary by a German rabbi called Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who lived in Germany in the 1800s. And he says the following short, fascinating statement. He says, this sharp and ironic statement was made at the time of deepest anxiety and despair. This marks the sense of wit that is characteristic trait of the clear-headed Jewish people. Rabbi Hirsch is saying something unbelievable. You know what they did? They told a joke. As far as they were concerned, it was the end of the Jewish people, and they made a funny. And what was the joke? Oh, Moses, no graves in Egypt? Oh, let's just die over here, shall we? How strange is that? And Rabbi Hirsch is telling us something very deep and profound. He's saying that the Jewish people are going to spend a history with challenges, difficulties, exiles, pogroms, and holocausts. But there's one thing we can use as a nation that is going to help us get through that, and that is to have a sense of humor. Because sometimes when you laugh, even when you're trapped, the sea in front of you will split. And the Talmud says that laughter isn't just for you. It should be shared with other people. Look at this amazing piece of Talmud from the Tractate of Tanit. And it says that Rabbi Baroka had a vision, and he saw Elijah the prophet in the marketplace. And he said to him, who in this marketplace do you think is worthy of achieving the next world? That's a fancy way of saying who's really spiritual and who's getting it right, who's going to heaven. Elijah pointed at two guys and said they were ideal candidates. So Rabbi Baroka wanted to know what they did. Were they doctors? Were they lawyers? Unlikely. And he approached them and said, hey guys, what do you do for a living? And they said an amazing thing. They said, we are clowns. We tell jokes for a living. When we see people around us a little bit depressed, a little bit upset, we cheer them up with a joke and a few funny words. And that brings them out and it helps cure them. And you know what? They pay us a little bit of money, and that's what we do. According to Jewish tradition, that is a pathway into the spiritual world, bringing laughter and joy to other people. So what I want to do right now is kind of figure out what makes a joke funny. I mean, why is it that we laugh when we hear a good joke? So I spoke to a lot of comedian friends of mine and producers, and I think I boiled it down to these 3 points, which is going to be a universal idea, which is going to relate to all jokes and all plays and all movies and all books that you read. They must have these 3 elements. And number 1, in order for a joke, this is joke 101. In order for a joke to be funny, there has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. Right? A story, a plot. You don't just start at the end. Number 2, the punchline, it's got to be a punchline, by the way. The punchline has to appear at the end of the joke. Number 3, and this is the most important, watch carefully, the punchline must be totally unexpected. You couldn't see it coming. If you see it coming, it isn't funny. That's why the second time you hear a joke, you just don't laugh. Unless your father's making it, and then you're going to laugh just for him. But otherwise, you're not going to do it. Okay, so now we have our paradigm. You have these 3 elements, you've got a joke. Let's apply that a little bit to a very common scene, which you may have seen in a number of movies. So if you go back to the days of Charlie Chaplin, this was the classic joke. The banana peel on the floor. And you got a very fancy guy in his suit, walking around pompous and haughty, and then the camera spans, whoop, onto the banana peel. Back to the guy, back to the banana peel. Back to the guy, back to the banana peel, and we know what happens next. There he is. There he is in all his glory. Now you all laughed. Why would you laugh at such a thing? This is horrible. This is not funny. A guy just slipped up on a banana peel and landed on his face. And yet we can't help but laugh. Actually, even the person who runs over to him to help pick him up is holding back a laugh while they're doing it. But it's not funny. Why are we laughing? Because we have the element of a good joke. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. We have a story of a guy walking along the street, all full of himself. Then we see banana peel, getting ready, and then the punchline, bang, the last place you expect to see a guy who's all fancily dressed is on the floor. And we laugh, even though it's not funny, because that's what a joke really is. I've got to tell you a couple of jokes. I heard one recently. My wife always accuses me of having ADD, and I say no, I have ADHD. ADD, as you know, stands for Attention Deficit Disorder. I believe I have attention deficit. Hey, donuts! Did you think about that one? Did you hear the one about the dyslexic devil worshipper? He sold his soul to Santa. Not so good. Okay. That's why I became a rabbi. Exactly. So we have the elements. Now let's apply the information we've got and put it into Jewish thought. First of all, let's go back to the first Jews, Abraham and Sarah. Now we know Abraham and Sarah had a lot of difficulty having children. And the Torah tells us they were visited by angels who informed Sarah at a very, she was already past the ability to naturally have children, that they were going to have a kid, a son. And he said, this is the angel speaking, I will return to you at this time next year, and behold, your wife Sarah will have a son. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well on in years, and Sarah laughed. Why is she laughing? Well, we have the elements of a joke. She didn't see that coming. Me, at my age, have a child? Pff, I don't believe it. And what came out? Came out laughter. But here's the strange part. Right after it says, Sarah conceived and bore a son just like she was promised. to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time which God had spoken, and they called him Isaac. Now the word Isaac in Hebrew is Yitzchak. Yitzchak means laughter. Laughter. Why would Sarah and Abraham call their son laughter? So I believe they were sending us, their descendants, a message. And that was that you can go through challenging times. And we as individuals and as a people go through so many difficulties. Like she did, not being able to have a child for so many years. But in the end, at the end you will see that laughter will come our way. You can't stop the movie halfway through and ask questions. You can't stop reading the book halfway through and say, doesn't make sense. Why is this terrible stuff happening to this person? You've got to get to the end. You've got to get to the punchline. And that is the reality that Sarah was able to tap into. She was able to say, I can see the end. And I want to pass this message on. Actually, the word Yitzchak means there will be laughter in the future. She had the ability to tap into the future and know that laughter will eventually be ours. If I were to ask you what the laughter holiday is, of all the Jewish holidays, which one's the laughing one? Purim. Have you read the story of Purim? It's terrifying. Right? It's not funny at all. If you read through it, we're all about to be wiped out. There we are again, the entire Jewish people. We have this megalomaniac, Achashverosh. We had this terrible henchman, Haman, and Achashverosh and Haman, the evil people from the Megillah, the story of Purim, are ready to wipe us out. And it goes on and on and on. But you know what? There's a woman called Esther, you see, and Achashverosh marries her without knowing who she was. And she has a cousin called Mordechai, and eventually everything works out fantastic. Now look at the words very carefully. The days when the Jews had rest from their enemies, and the month which flipped for them from sorrow to gladness, and from mourning unto a day of rejoicing. The key word over there is it flipped. That's the punchline. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that Esther was actually Jewish? I'm sure everyone said, yeah, we knew all along. They didn't. They had no idea. And it all turned around in a flash. When that flip happens, you know what comes out of us? Schok, laughter. That is what Sarah was talking about. Hold on, she said. Don't stop. We've got to keep going as a people, because in the end, the laughter will be ours. But you've got to wait to the last moment. You've got to read the last page of the book. You've got to see the final moments of the movie of Jewish history in order to appreciate it. The Talmud tells us, we're going to go further in Jewish history now, about the time of the destruction of the Second Temple. And there were 4 great rabbis who were there at the time, and they got to see this terrible, terrible sight of a broken temple behind them in Jerusalem. And the Talmud tells us, Rabbi Gamliel, Elazar ben Azariah, Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva were standing there, and they saw the destruction, and they all started crying, except Rabbi Akiva. What did Rabbi Akiva do? He burst out laughing. And they turned around to him and said, why are you laughing? And he turned around to them and said, in good Jewish fashion, question with a question, why are you crying? And he turned around and said, because the temple is destroyed. This temple that stood for hundreds of years, the epicenter of Jewish life. This is what we've been attached to. This has been our connection, our spiritual home. It's destroyed. And Rabbi Akiva says something to them which was unbelievable. And he wasn't just talking to them. He's talking to us, those people who read his words. And he said, you know what? I am laughing. Because if those people, the Romans, who go against God and celebrate, because they were making a loud noise at the time, how much more will we laugh in the future days of the third temple? Rabbi Akiva was following in the tradition of his ancestors and passing down this message. And he laughed and said, you're not getting it, guys. You're halfway through the story. You're seeing a part, a small snippet of Jewish history, but there's much more, and it's going to get much, much better, because in the end, the last laugh will be ours. We have to hold on to our people, to our traditions, to our faith, and eventually, laughter will be ours. I'm going to finish with the words of Jimmy Durante, he of the humongous nose, who actually was not Jewish, although he does look it. And his words are so beautiful, though. He says, all of us have schnozzles, if not in our faces, then in our character, minds, or habits. When we admit our schnozzles, instead of defending them, we begin to laugh, and the world laughs with us. I think that's a great summary of all of Jewish history. Thank you all very much.